Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we're just going to talk this evening, hopefully for about a half hour or to 40 minutes on holistic strategies for healthy living after a cancer diagnosis. Um, and then we'll leave some time for questions. And I really do welcome some questions and reflections at the end if you feel so moved. Um, so let's see, why am I not able to advance here? Okay, so these are the themes that I plan to talk about tonight: nutrition, environmental exposures, and the role of stress. And we'll start with nutrition. This is a favorite topic of mine. It's pretty clear from large population cohort studies that people who eat a diet abundant in fruits and vegetables, organic when possible, though it's okay if you can't do organic exclusively, a diet that incorporates a variety of colorful plant-based whole foods that are seasonal, that include richness in fiber, that those diets tend to be helpful for improving outcomes and for prevention when it comes to cancer. Unfortunately, Americans on the whole eat a lot of ultra processed foods, which don't really meet any of those criteria. And so the definition of ultra processed foods are really industrialized formulations that are essentially just some variation on wheat, soy, or corn to which oil, sugar, and salt has been added to increase palatability and shelf life. These foods tend to be very high in sugar, trans fats, sodiums, and refined starches, very low in vitamins, minerals, proteins, and fiber. Um, and they have started to comprise a very significant percentage of calories that Americans eat day to day. And that's been a shift that's occurred over the last 100 years. And we're realizing more and more how that's impacting rates of chronic illness in the United States. So some examples of ultra processed foods are sugar sweetened breakfast cereals, sodas, cheese crackers, energy drinks, granola bars, white breads, and potato chips. And this is an example of a label that you might see. A good rule of thumb is that if a label has more than 5 ingredients and things that have multiple syllables, probably it's an ultra processed food. And what I tell patients to always look out for is anytime you see soybean oil or palm oil, um, it's an ultra processed food and it's not good for you. These particular oils are very inflammatory for the immune system. And so that's a nice kind of like rule of thumb. Obviously, our bodies are amazingly resilient. And if you occasionally eat Cheez-Its, which I do as well, you have lots of mechanisms by which that's okay. So I don't want any of this to create food anxiety, but it's just helpful to sort of navigate options in the grocery store. So this would be an example of an ultra processed food that is not really helping your body, despite whatever claims might be on the label in terms of added fiber or the vitamins that they add to foods. And American children eat a lot of ultra processed foods. So this is data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which is conducted by the Centers for Disease Control. And this is looking at rates or the percentage of calories, daily calories consumed by children between the ages of 2 and 19 from the years 1999 to 2018. And what we see is that during that time frame, the percentage of daily calories comprised by ultra processed foods went from being about 60% of all kids' daily calories were ultra processed to from 1999 in 2018, 69% of all of their daily calories were from ultra processed foods. So, I mean, obviously, it's too simplistic to say, this is why children are having lots of mood disorders and, different rates of illnesses that we're seeing on the rise in terms of environmental allergies and that kind of thing. It would be way too simplistic to make that A to B connection, but I don't think it's good for us as a population that so much of our calories are no longer whole food plant based. This is from that same publication showing the shift in consumption patterns from the year 1999 to 2018. And you see that there's been a really dramatic increase in these ready to heat and eat frozen foods here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but a lot more calories are consumed from this category, as well as sweet snacks and sugar sweetened beverages. A lot more processed fats and oils and condiments and sauces from 1999 to 2018. So try to stay away from those ready to heat and eat frozen pizzas and sugar sweetened beverages when you can. This is a slide from the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2018, and it shows the role that nutrition plays for overall health. This looks at total deaths in the United States and the different lifestyle factors that were associated with those. And you can see that dietary risks, more than tobacco use, more than being overweight, more than having high blood pressure, more than having low physical activity, account for more deaths in the United States. So just really emphasizing the role of that diet plays in overall health. Just to sort of further drive this point home, this is from the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is a division of the World Health Organization. And this was a publication from the journal Lancet in 2023, very recent, showing that they are now making a clear connection between ultra-processed food consumptions being associated with increased risk of cancer and cardiometabolic risk. But what's promising is that just substituting 10% of processed foods with an equal amount of minimally processed foods can lower a person's overall cancer risk, and then specifically for head and neck cancers, esophageal, certain forms of skin cancer, colon cancer, and postmenopausal breast cancer. So, like I said, if you're going to have your Cheez-It, just have like a little tiny little radish sliced up on a salad the next day and know that you did a good thing for your gut and for your overall immune system. So what should we be eating? I sort of started out the talk with a little bit of a ultra processed foods, and so, but to be more constructive, like what foods really should we be eating to promote health? And this is a quote from a nutritionist named Liz Lipsky, who I have been really inspired by. She's written some really wonderful books on the role of nutrition and health. And she said, the life in food gives us life. There is no life in something that is an industrialized formulation of corn, soy, and wheat. But when you eat broccoli or a tomato or ginger or a lentil or a blueberry, there's still life in that food. It grew from the earth, and it still has something to give your body beyond just calories. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, fiber, omega-3s. One of the reasons why these whole foods are so beneficial for us is that they contain chemicals in them called phytochemicals. So Greek phyto means plant. These are nutrient or molecules that are not vitamins. They're not minerals. They are molecules that the plant makes to protect itself from environmental stressors. So for instance, the pigment that makes the leaf of a maple tree look purple in the fall when the days get shorter and the temperatures get colder, molecularly looks very similar to the pigment that gives blueberries their blue color. And those are from the same family of molecules called anthocyanins. So that pigment is a way of the tree to protect itself against the stress of colder weather. And in our bodies, it protects our DNA. So a lot of these phytochemicals, part of their medicinal properties are that they are antioxidant, or they facilitate cellular repair and defense against aging and stress. A story I like to tell is that I try to grow vegetables every year and I always fail. I said I like gardening. I do not succeed at vegetable growing, even though I keep trying. And one year I had green peppers growing in my backyard and we had slugs get into them. And every single pepper where the slug had bored a hole had a bright red halo against the green of the fruit. And it was the red pigment produced by the plant as a way of resisting stress. And so, I didn't enjoy eating those sluggy peppers, but I do think that had I eaten them, probably I would have gotten some good antioxidants that the plant had produced for me as it was trying to save itself. And that's another reason why eating organic does tend to be better for us. There's more antioxidants, we think, in organic foods because the plants have had to resist environmental stressors that conventionally grown produce doesn't need to because of the use of herbicides. I wanted to speak briefly about this category of phytonutrients called functional foods. And if you've never heard that term before, just briefly, a functional food is something that serves our bodies, it is healthy for us, independent of the fact that it might provide calories, vitamins, or minerals. It has other properties that protect cells and protect against oxidative stress and support our immune system. And so just to name a few examples, there's a long list of functional foods. But here on this slide, we see sulforaphanes, which is are molecules that are really rich in the cruciferous vegetable family. So anytime you eat cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, for instance, you're getting a lot of sulforaphanes. And in particular, the sprouts, broccoli seeds sprouted, are densely packed with sulforaphane. There's research from Johns Hopkins University in the 1990s where they tried to quantify the relative amount of sulforaphane in broccoli sprouts compared to the mature plant. And those researchers estimated that there was 100 times more sulforaphane in the sprouts. And so this is why this is a popular food. Resveratrol is a molecule that you can find in the skin of grapes or in red wine. I think it's healthier to get it in grapes. It's also present in other foods, not just fruit. EGCG, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. That's from green tea. And then chocolate, the flavonoids in chocolate are a functional food. Those are they have antioxidant properties. Phytochemicals do lots of things for us. They slow aging, they support the immune system, they reduce inflammation, balance our blood sugar levels, and can influence hormone levels in the body as well. One of my favorite categories of functional foods are omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. This is really the truest example of the saying, you are what you eat. So when you eat polyunsaturated fatty acids, they work their way into your cell membranes. So every cell in your body is, surrounded by a thin, fluid, permeable membrane that is built out of the polyunsaturated fatty acids that you eat. And we want that membrane to be sort of like a kelp forest, fluid and flowing and permeable when it needs to be, but also robust where it needs to be. And when you eat trans fats or more inflammatory fats, think of your cell membranes as being more like, I don't feel like flowing right now. And that's not as good necessarily for the signaling that has to happen from outside the cell to inside the cell. So fatty acids, are part of the cell membrane structure and contribute to the function of the proteins inside and outside the cell and the types of messaging from signaling pathways that happens inside the cell. They can influence gene expression, and they have a really important role to play in the inflammatory tone, how our immune systems are behaving in our bodies. There's different kinds of essential fatty acids. So omega-6s are one example of a polyunsaturated fatty acid, and then omega-3s are the really beneficial ones. We always eat a combination, and humans have, since we've been walking upright, eaten a mixture of omega-6s to omega-3s. But the way our food supply has changed with modernization and industrialization of agricultural practices and with the advent of ultra-processed foods, whereas our ancestors might have eaten a ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s that might have been 4-1, omega-6 to 3, nowadays we think it's closer to 25-1. And that is affecting our immune systems. So this is the recommendations from the American Heart Association are to eat in general for the average person about 500 milligrams a day. It's estimated that only maybe about 20% of people actually meet that target. To give you a frame of reference, when you eat about 4 ounces, which would be a serving about this big of wild-caught salmon, you'd be getting 2,400 milligrams of beneficial omega-3s. Okay, and the daily recommended intake should be about 500 milligrams. This is a very busy slide that gives medical students nightmares when they have to try to memorize these pathways. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. But I'm trying to tell, by showing you this slide, I'm trying to tell you a story of what's happening microscopically in your body 1,000 times a second. So when your immune system senses, okay, I need to do something. I need to make a molecule to send a message. I'm sensing stress or I'm sensing a threat, and I'm going to respond by making a signaling molecule. The precursor materials that it has to work with are the molecules in its membrane. When it's deciding which kind of message to send, It has to work with what it has available to it to build those molecules. So it grabs something, proteins grab a precursor molecule from the cell membrane and turn that into a molecule that sends a message to other immune cells in the vicinity. If you primarily have a predominance of omega-6s, then the downstream signaling molecules are going to be inflammatory. They're going to make you feel more achy. They might contribute to brain inflammation. They might contribute to achy joints. If you have an abundance of omega-3s in your cell membrane, then those downstream molecules are going to be able to keep your immune system in better regulation, reduce inflammatory tone. So I hope that makes sense. That's where we're going down these two columns. Down this pathway, achy, down this pathway, the downstream signaling molecules keep us in balance. They turn off the chronic inflammatory response. And we know that a lot of chronic illnesses nowadays that are affecting Americans are at their core driven by chronic inflammation. And so this is why omega-3s are so important, because they reduce inflammation in our bodies. It's definitely relevant in a conversation about the role of functional foods in cancer prevention and cancer treatment to talk about omega-3s. It's found that women with the highest intake of omega-3s tend to have a reduced risk of breast cancer compared to those with the lowest intake. And this is a study from the British Medical Journal in 2013. Every 0.1 gram per day increased intake was associated with a 5% reduction in breast cancer risk. And this might be a possible mechanism why. Again, this is a very busy slide, but this is that omega-6 pathway. Just the whole slide we're looking at is omega-6. So we're pulling an omega-6 from the cell membrane, and we're making one of these inflammatory signaling molecules. One of its effects is to increase estrogen in our bodies. So omega-6 fatty acids produce some downstream effects on our hormone balance in such a way that might not be favorable if we're dealing with a gynecologic cancer that's influenced by estrogen exposure. So again, another busy slide that medical students have to memorize, but I just wanted to sort of explain that association with omega-3s and hormone balance. Our functional food number 2 is probably my favorite. This is the sulforaphanes. This is what we find in cruciferous vegetables. This is a picture that kind of shows you how cruciferous vegetables get their name. If you slice open a cabbage, you'll see kind of a cross. If you can sort of imagine, I think it looks more like a tree, but that's where the word cruciferous comes from. And so these molecules have anti-inflammatory properties in our bodies, antioxidants. So antioxidants are basically things that just sort of sponge up heat that gets generated by the business of living so our cells don't get damaged. They protect our DNA, and they can slow tumor growth when they're studied. I don't know if this crowd has kids of the right age to be watching Marvel movies, but this is sort of where I'm living these days. When we go to the theaters, we're watching a lot of Marvel movies. So this is a character, Thor, played by Chris Hemsworth. And what Thor does when he needs to come in Hollywood style and rescue a city on the brink of disaster from some alien monster is he takes his hammer and he goes like this, and his eyes glow like lightning. And then all of a sudden, everything is better because Thor's hammer came in, and just this like reverberation effect of protection happens from Thor. Essentially, that's what sulforaphanes do inside your cells. Not even kidding. I think it's a very appropriate metaphor. So, what sulforaphanes do is they unlock this protein that's just floating around inside your cells, just waiting to be awoken. And then you eat broccoli, and this transcription factor called NRF2 is like, oh, now it's my turn to do something. And it migrates into the nucleus of your cells, and it turns on the production of hundreds of antioxidants that then go on to protect your DNA. This is why sulforaphanes have anti-cancer properties. They slow tumor growth. It's because of their relationship with NRF2. So think of Thor's NRF2 inside your cell is Thor's hammer, and sulforaphanes turn it on. So maybe we should say sulforaphanes are like Thor using the hammer, which is NRF2. That's what I'm going to say next time I give this presentation. So sulforaphanes reduce mortality rates from heart disease. These are things that have been verified in studies. reduce the incidence of type 2 diabetes, renal cancer. They improve mortality rates in people who are living with breast and lung cancer. And they slow the progression of chronic kidney disease in people who eat more foods rich in sulforaphanes. Moving on to functional food number 3, which is fiber. So this is a photograph. This is a magnification of a piece of poop. So stool down here in the screen. And you can imagine under an electron microscope, this is like a little bit of fiber, maybe from some broccoli that a person ate. And then this is all of the bacteria that are fermenting, nibbling on that fiber. And these bacteria are going to be really important for keeping your immune system in balance. Your gut microbiome is nourished by healthy fiber. So fiber is in non-digestible, it's from the non-digestible carbohydrates in plants. Absolutely has a positive impact on rates of heart disease. I call fiber like a pipe cleaner for your gut. It helps you just sort of clean out the colon so that carcinogens exit the body rather than staying inside the colon where they might get reabsorbed into your circulation. And studies have shown that there is a significant inverse association relationship between fiber intake and breast cancer as well as colorectal cancer. So fiber is good, and Americans don't eat very much of it. We're supposed to eat, on average 25 grams a day. Our ancestors probably ate closer to 100 grams a day. Most Americans might eat about 16 grams a day. These are some foods on the left that are really rich in fiber, but that's a very short list. Fiber is in lots of foods. And there's good resources online for how to get more fiber in your diet. This is a recipe that I share with patients. And I'm sure Lisa can share this with you. If anybody likes oats, this is an overnight oats recipe that's really packed full of antioxidants, fiber, and omega-3s. So it's oats with chia and flax seeds, which are good plant sources of omega-3s. The berries have antioxidants, and it's got a lot of fiber in it. So we can share that afterwards. And then the last functional food that I want to talk about before we go into environmental exposures and stress is green tea. So EGCG is epigallo. I always forget how to say that. And now, of course, my Zoom bar is like over my cheat word. Epigallocatechin gallate is this mouthful of a molecule that's in green tea, and it is a very powerful antioxidant and has a lot of anti-tumor properties in studies. When they've done population studies asking people about green tea intake, there's demonstrated kind of repeatedly in multiple studies a dose-response relationship between green tea intake and the rates of different cancers. And this is one from the Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition showing a dose response between green tea and breast cancer risk. So those who drank the most green tea tended to have lower rates of breast cancer, just to give you one example. Also for gynecological cancers, higher consumption of green tea appears to be protective. The same is true for ovarian and endometrial cancer. So in summary, an anti-cancer diet aims for as much variety of plant-based colorful foods as possible, minimal processed foods and fast foods, avoid that soybean oil and palm oil. It's a diet that is abundant in fruits and vegetables and fiber from whole foods, which really balances carbohydrates, fats, and proteins at each meal. And so I'm happy to take questions about that at the end, but I'm going to move on to talking about environmental exposures right now as another strategy for cancer thriving and prevention. This is a topic, and again, I don't want to create any anxiety. This is ubiquitous. It's really impossible to avoid exposure to these things completely. And I just think it's always really important that we remember that our bodies are very resilient and we have lots of redundant pathways built in to help us deal with these environmental exposures. And humans have always had different exposures to deal with. That's why we have immune systems. But to the extent that we can limit our exposure, we should when it comes to glyphosate. So glyphosate is an herbicide that was really introduced to the world stage in the 1970s. as a chemical that was used in industrialized agriculture as an herbicide. And it has just spread like wildfire. And it's estimated that by 2025, we'll spray 920,000 tons all over the globe annually. And it has been classified as a carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which again is a branch of the World Health Organization. It's still legal to use it. And people who, spray, it's basically the main ingredient in the herbicide Roundup. And so you obviously are more susceptible to exposure if you're directly using Roundup, but there's ambient exposure even for people who aren't working in agriculture or using it in private gardening. So this is from a study looking that the average urinary levels in people who were exposed to Roundup through their occupation had between 0.26 and 73 micrograms per liter. But in people who aren't exposed through occupational reasons also had some degree of Roundup in their bodies, of glyphosate in their bodies. And the trend suggests that the degree of exposure is increasing over time. And it's even present in cord blood from neonates. And glyphosate, in addition to being carcinogenic, so promoting tumor growth and DNA damage, it's also really probably harmful to our immune system and to energy production in the body. So it kills the bacteria in our guts, which we know it sort of has antimicrobial properties. It sort of works like an antibiotic. And so you want the good microbes in your gut to be thriving. So eating food that's heavily sprayed with glyphosate is not good for your gut microbiome or your immune system. And it also is probably directly injures the organelles inside your cells that make energy, the mitochondria. It interferes with cellular energy production. So, for people who suffer from dizziness and fatigue and headaches, numbness, you want your mitochondria, those little energy makers in your cells, to be really happy. So minimizing exposure to this chemical would be a good idea. The best way to limit your exposure to glyphosate, aside from just not spraying it on your dandelions, is to not eat ultra processed food. So if you're eating genetically modified soy, corn, or wheat in the United States, you know that crop had glyphosate applied to it really heavily. So when you can, minimize refined grains that are soy, corn, and wheat, and eat non-GMO if possible. Endocrine disrupting chemicals are another topic that are kind of depressing. And these are lots of different substances fall under the category of endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are also ever present in the environment, put into our environment by industry. They're used in pesticides, plasticizers, pharmaceutical agents, personal care products, and packaging. The United States tends to have very lax standards with regards to new chemicals that are released into the environment relative to other industrialized nations. In the United States, the consumer has to really make the case of harm for a substance to be removed from the marketplace. In other countries, the industry has to prove safety before it can be released. So in the US, we just put things out there. And if a consumer group chooses to decide to examine it and ask whether there's a relationship with cancer, then maybe it will get removed, which is not how it works in other parts of the world, unfortunately. So we think that these molecules are probably part of the reason why girls now get their periods at a younger age. And they really do affect hormone balance. One of the yuckiest are phthalates, which are molecules that are mainly used in food packaging materials and things that are in plastics. So IV tubing, food containers, children's toys. And even while the United States is trying to crack down on their presence in prescription drugs, surprise, surprise, that beautiful bright blue ibuprofen generic tablet that you might have bought, 15 years ago probably had phthalates in it. I think they are trying to limit that, but things that come from overseas, we can't really regulate what other industrial processes are being used overseas. So like from China, for instance, I think that it's still an assumption that they might be in plastics and children's toys. I have a son who likes to chew on his Lego pieces absentmindedly, and I'm just like, no, don't chew on the plastics. Personal care products. I think that this is from a really cool organization called the Environmental Working Group, and they, are a nonprofit that tries to study the impact of endocrine disrupting chemicals on our bodies, and have found that nail polish is probably a source of exposure for women. In general, tips for reducing your exposure to environmental pollutants and endocrine disrupting chemicals: don't drink hot beverages from paper or styrofoam. I always tell when I see the students that rotate with me in the clinic, they show up, bright and early and bright-eyed and ready to learn with their Starbucks coffee with the plastic lid on it. And I'm just like, don't drink that. I'm a real killjoy when it comes to the morning coffee, because I just think that you shouldn't have a hot beverage causing water vapor droplets on the inner side of your lid, then dropping back down into your beverage. You're just drinking bisphenol A and other endocrine disrupting chemicals. So skip the lid when you can. Bring your own stainless steel mug if you're going to get a hot beverage on the go. Try to avoid storing and heating your food in plastics. Say no to plastic straws. Don't eat charred meat if you can avoid it. There's definitely a link between the molecules that are made when animal protein is charred or singed, called heterocyclic amines, and cancer. Eat lots of fiber. Again, it's the pipe cleaner that clears carcinogens from your gut. Drink plenty of filtered water. And then for personal care products and cleaning products, use the Environmental Working Group's website. It's free to access. You can buy your lipstick or look at it in the drugstore, and then look the product up in their Skin Deep app to see whether it has a lot of carcinogens in it before deciding to buy it. And there's a lot of really good stuff on the market now, thanks to groups like the Environmental Working Group that aren't carcinogenic. So moving on into our last category of lifestyle strategies for supporting a person through a cancer journey, I wanted to talk about stress and the role that stress plays for our health. What is stress? Stress is a state one experiences when there's a mismatch between the perceived demands that are placed on you and our ability to cope with those demands. So to give you an example, you might have person A start their day and spill coffee down the front of their shirt and have that just be a disaster. It was like the last straw. They just do not have the resources to cope with that interruption of the daily routine. Another person might pour coffee down their front and just be like, well, I'm just going to go get another blouse. I'll be 3 minutes later than I would have otherwise been. I'm going to move on with my day. And so it was the same experience, but a difference between their perceived ability to deal with it. Person B does not have stress. Person A does. So the question is how can we all in our day-to-day life try to move from A to B? And that's really a matter of generating more resilience. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. We know that chronic stress, while it's way too simplistic to say chronic stress causes cancer, absolutely not. But we do think that it creates an ambience in the body that is favorable to tumor progression. So chronic overactivation of the stress response system in the body, which is this beautiful dynamic cascade of hormone signaling that happens between glands in our brain and in our bodies, the hypothalamus and pituitary in our brain, and then our adrenal glands that kind of sit above our kidneys, generate stress hormones when we perceive a stressor. And it's appropriate that those get activated occasionally so that we can get through our day. But when they're chronically overactivated by working in a toxic environment, having poor sleep, having strained relationships, lack of connection, chronic overactivation of that system probably suppresses the immune system in such a way that it can't do cancer surveillance as well. And it also leads to metabolic shifts in our body where we have higher blood sugars and higher insulin levels, which can promote tumor progression. So that's kind of the link between chronic stress and cancer. And I think really the antidote to stress, we can't live without it. We'll never all be always, if we were the person B with the coffee down the front, not caring, A, we'd be really boring. And that just wouldn't be realistic at all. So we're all going to be person A sometimes. And the question is how do we try to adapt to that? I think it's really about cultivating resilience. And I like this picture of a tree growing on a rock. I used to live in the southwest of the United States, and you would see just these trees growing in impossible places. And they obviously have a high degree of physical resilience, so they can withstand winds coming at them in one direction. They can withstand minimal nutrition, minimal water. Um, Probably trees have spiritual resilience too, but in this case, the physical resilience. So, but humans can cultivate different types of resilience to help us cope with stress. And this is just sort of a breakdown of the different categories of resilience. So, when it comes to physical resilience, when we do our exercise and walk and do yoga or chair yoga, we're increasing our physical resilience by building flexibility, endurance, and strength of our muscles. There's also mental resilience. We can have mental flexibility. We can develop our attention spans. We can engender a more optimistic worldview. We can learn how to incorporate multiple points of view by really exercising our mental resilience. We can exercise emotional resilience and really work to cultivate that, learning how to be emotionally more flexible, less brittle. We can learn to err toward positive feelings rather than the negative, to have better self-regulation of our feelings, to nurture positive relationships and not be negatively impacted by negative ones, and to feel ease instead of resistance as we go about the world. And then finally, spiritual resilience, spiritual flexibility, commitment to core values, learning tolerance. I think that it's really interesting to think of tolerance as being a sign of spiritual resilience, because very often we think of dogmatism as being people who are really committed to core values. They might be more dogmatic, but actually some of the most deeply spiritual teachers are those that are the most have the most to teach us about tolerance of other points of view. So that's just sort of an example of ways to cultivate more resilience to counteract the effects of a chronically activated stress response system. Let's see. So this is just a list of activities that you can do to develop more resilience along those 4 parameters. Probably none of these will come as a surprise to you. But as you're engaging in these positive self-care practices, I think it's helpful to think of them in that context, to put them in that framework as okay, I'm taking 5 minutes from myself to just sit here and look out this window and breathe. I am building more cognitive, mental, spiritual, and physical resilience. I'm going to be ready for tomorrow in a different way. So I want to spend a couple of minutes before I conclude and take some questions, just highlighting a couple of these resilience enhancing self-care practices. So I think heart rate variability is so cool. Karen, I don't know if did we talk about this at some point together? So I love this. Heart rate variability is a biomarker of how resilient the subconscious mind is. So what is often thought is that your heart rate is really steady over a given period of time, that the beat to beat variation, the amount of time that passes between one heartbeat and the next is set. So if you have a heart rate of 60 beats per minute, then 1 second passes between each heartbeat. But actually, when a person has a healthy nervous system and has resilience of the subconscious mind, of that autonomic nervous system, then there is a lot of variation in milliseconds between one beat and the next. So the higher your variation, the higher your heart rate variability, the healthier you are. States of chronic illness, being sedentary, being very sick, being fatigued, having chronic infections, leads to states of having lower heart rate variability. A more fixed amount of time transpires between one beat of the ventricle to the next. And so heart rate variability is used as a biomarker of psychological well-being and autonomic balance. And there's different biofeedback tools that you can use to measure your heart rate variability. The Apple Watch will give a reading. I don't know how accurate that is, but there's other tools that people are now using to measure this. And the nice thing about some self-care practices is that you can really improve, you can get some great feedback on simple things that you can do to improve your heart rate variability. And it shows that it's beneficial for people struggling with the cancer diagnosis, that improving heart rate variability with biofeedback devices is beneficial. So it has prognostic value in cancer. It predicts better survival. And there's I think this has been really affirmed, but this is a recent publication showing this point. So I love this is an older study from 2001 where they looked at the effect of rosary prayers and yoga mantras on heart rate variability and found that recitation of the rosary and doing yoga mantra does have a positive impact on heart rate variability. Um, Another example of yoga's benefit on heart rate variability was done among Gulf War veterans who had served in Iraq. And there was a syndrome that a lot of these young men and women came back with, which was characterized by chronic joint pain, fatigue, struggles with sleep, mood, irritability, memory problem, poor concentration, and physical complaints, including pains, irritable bowel syndrome, and respiratory issues. And so this was called Gulf War illness. And so in this intervention, researchers took a group of people suffering from this syndrome and they put half of them into a yoga treatment protocol and half of them had standard care, which was cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a great tool for people suffering. But it was considered the control in this case. And they found that the people who had the yoga intervention had better heart rate variability and that corresponded to better pain scores. So by that measure of improvement, it seemed to be more effective than the typical therapy. And I just thought that was a really interesting outcome that a mind-body approach below the level of their thinking mind, yoga is in the body, not in the mind, that it was better for their nervous system, for their resilience. Um, this is also a lovely one that I'm kind of evangelistic about. I think it's just great because I find it easy to do, and I don't find meditation easy to do in general, although I love it. But this is from the Kundalini yoga tradition, and it's a particular meditation that improves heart rate variability and emotional, cognitive, and spiritual resilience. It also is very good for your brain, and it's being studied by Alzheimer's researchers who are motivated to try to prevent cognitive decline in people who are at risk. And they're getting really good outcomes looking at functional MRI in people with risk for dementia who are doing this meditation. So it's called the Kirtan Kriya. Like I said, it's from the Kundalini yoga tradition. The research has shown that just 12 minutes a day of doing this meditation can be beneficial. Yoga practice, I think, is commonly understood to be body postures that are done to increase strength and flexibility, but really, yoga incorporates breath work, it incorporates mantras, and it incorporates visualization. And so this Kirtan Kriya practice has all of that. You say a mantra out loud, the Satanama, which means my divine essence, I think, in Sanskrit. You do a mudra, which is the word for body posture with your fingers. So you don't have to bend your arm behind your head at all. All you do is sit quietly in a chair and touch your fingers together in a sequence like that as you say the mantra. And I'm going to make you guys listen to me do it just for briefly. And as you're doing this, you visualize the sound coming from some higher place through the top of your head in an L shape, exiting your forehead. So that part for me takes a little bit of practice, the visualization, but it starts to feel more fluid with practice. And with this meditation, it's 2 minutes of saying Satanama out loud to a particular melody, 2 minutes of whispering it, 4 minutes of saying it silently to yourself as you continue to do the mudra and the visualization. And then you move into 2 minutes of whispered again and 2 minutes of saying it out loud. So in total, that's 12 minutes. And there's lots of YouTube videos where you can be coached through and have someone sort of keeping time for you. But the melody is just the first 4 notes of Mary Had a Little Lamb. So I try to do it once a day. I do it in the morning just because I feel better when I do it in the morning, but it doesn't matter if you do it morning or night. I just sit upright in a chair, and you can't, I'll have my hands here so you can see. And I don't have a good singing voice, so apologies, but this is what it looks like when I do it. So, Satanama, Satanama, Satanama. And then for the whispered part, after 2 minutes, it's um, they think some of the benefit of this might be that the way your tongue has to move on the top of your mouth to say the mantra probably activates some acupressure points at the top of the mouth. The way you have to move your diaphragm to say the mantra as well probably is really good for heart rate variability because of how it stimulates the vagus nerve. So it's an ancient practice that now we can kind of see with modern science with functional MRI is really good for us. Um, so I think I've basically covered all of this stuff, and I've already gone over the amount of time I wanted to go. I've been talking for 45 minutes. So the 478 breath work I'm going to skip, but it's a beautiful breathwork technique that's really simple to learn. 2 minutes of this, 2 minutes twice a day of this technique can also be life-changing for a lot of people who suffer from anxiety, breathlessness. I use it a lot in my patients with long COVID, panic attacks. It lowers blood pressure. And so this is another practice that really shouldn't be given short shrift. It's really powerful. Um, this is a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. Breath is the bridge which connects life to consciousness, which unites your body to your thoughts. Whenever your mind becomes scattered, use your breath as the means to take hold of your mind again. So it's sort of a beautiful comment on what breath means. And with that, I am going to conclude. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might
Thank you
have. And
so much, Dr. Baxley. I mean, I have my notepad going. I hope everybody was taking notes because I know I'm going to get a lot of questions afterward. Probably one of which might be, can we have her slides? So I'm not sure how
yes,
copyrighted you have them or not, but if that's
no, I'm
available,
happy to share. Yeah,
that's
I'll
great.
send you the presentation and you can distribute it far and wide.
I am going to thank Dr. Baxley and stop our recording.